Emma and Daniel's love story was the kind that made people smile when they heard it. It wasn't dramatic or filled with over-the-top gestures, but it had something far more precious: authenticity. They met during their sophomore year of college in a way that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Emma was sitting on a bench outside the art building, sketching the sunset with charcoal-streaked fingers. Daniel, lost and late for his engineering class, stopped to ask for directions. Something about her calm demeanor caught his attention, and instead of just pointing him toward his destination, she offered to walk with him so he wouldn't get lost again. That small act sparked a friendship neither of them expected. At first glance, they couldn't have been more different. Emma lived life like an open book, colorful, expressive, and unafraid to take risks. She loved painting murals on old pieces of driftwood she found at the beach and often gave them away to strangers who admired her work. Daniel, on the other hand, was reserved, practical, and methodical. He preferred logic puzzles to abstract art and spent most weekends tinkering with gadgets in his dorm room. Despite these differences, they balanced each other in ways neither had anticipated. Emma taught Daniel how to see beauty in imperfection, while Daniel showed Emma the value of planning ahead. Their relationship deepened over shared meals, late-night conversations, and road trips to nowhere in particular. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Life tested them repeatedly. During their final year of college, Daniel landed an internship in another state, forcing them into a long-distance relationship. The months apart were tough, especially for Emma, who thrived on connection and spontaneity. Yet they made it work through handwritten letters, surprise visits, and endless phone calls. When Daniel returned after graduation, he proposed to her on the same beach where they'd had their first date. A quiet moment accompanied only by the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Over the next few years, they faced new challenges together. Jobs took them to cities far from home, and financial struggles sometimes weighed heavily on them. Through it all, though, they remained each other's anchor. Friends often joked that if anyone could make a long-distance relationship work twice, it was Emma and Daniel. And now, 6 years after they first met, they were finally standing on the brink of forever. Their wedding day was set against the backdrop of their favorite coastal town, where everything had started. The venue was simple yet breathtaking, an outdoor gazebo adorned with white flowers and greenery, overlooking the sparkling ocean. Guests trickled in throughout the morning, chatting excitedly as they took their seats. Children chased seagulls near the water's edge, and soft music floated through the air. Everyone agreed it felt less like a formal event and more like a joyful reunion. For Emma, the day carried extra significance. Her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents passed away, had always dreamed of seeing her walk down the aisle. Unfortunately, Grandma Rose had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving behind a void no one could fill. Still, Emma carried her memory close, wearing a locket with her photo tucked safely beneath her dress. Today wasn't just about celebrating her love for Daniel. It was also about honoring the people who shaped her journey. As Emma got ready at her childhood home, surrounded by her bridesmaids and family, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Was she truly ready for this next chapter? Could anything live up to the dreams she'd held onto for so long? Little did she know, Daniel had one last surprise planned, a moment that would remind her exactly why she fell in love with him in the first place. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with the sun casting a golden glow over the small coastal town. Emma woke up early, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. She stood by the window of her childhood bedroom, gazing out at the familiar streets where she'd grown up. The house smelled of fresh flowers and coffee as her mother bustled around downstairs, humming softly to herself. For a moment, Emma allowed herself to soak in the quiet before the whirlwind of the day began. Her bridesmaids arrived shortly after sunrise, armed with steaming cups of tea, makeup bags, and cheerful chatter. They helped Emma into her dress, a flowing gown that seemed to shimmer like sunlight on water. Her mother stepped in to adjust the back, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. "You look just like your grandmother did on her wedding day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Emma smiled, feeling both comforted and bittersweet. Grandma Rose had always told her that weddings weren't just about two people coming together. They were about celebrating everyone who had shaped their lives along the way. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel was pacing nervously in his hotel room. He adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time, glancing at himself in the mirror. His best man, an old college buddy named Jake, tried to lighten the mood by cracking jokes, but Daniel barely heard them. His mind kept drifting to the secret he'd been keeping from Emma, the one detail of the day he hoped would make everything perfect. He checked his phone again, reassuring himself that all the arrangements were in place. It had taken months of careful planning, late-night calls, and even a few favors from friends, but it was finally happening. Outside, the venue buzzed with activity. Chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the gazebo, each adorned with ribbons that fluttered gently in the ocean breeze. Vases filled with wildflowers lined the aisle, their vibrant colors matching the cheerful atmosphere. Guests mingled under the shade of palm trees, catching up and laughing as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Children ran barefoot through the sand, leaving tiny footprints behind them. The air smelled of salt water and blooming jasmine, creating a sense of calm despite the flurry of preparations. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the ceremony, Emma took a deep breath and stepped outside, clutching her bouquet tightly. Her father waited for her at the bottom of the steps, dressed impeccably in his suit. When he saw her, his eyes welled up with tears. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked, offering her his arm. Emma nodded, though her stomach churned with anticipation. Walking down the aisle wasn't just a symbolic gesture for her. It was a walk toward a future she dreamed of for years. At the gazebo, Daniel stood waiting, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. There was Jake, giving him a thumbs up from the front row. There was his mother, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And there, near the back, sat Mrs. Bennet, looking frail but radiant in a pastel dress. Beside her was Liam, Emma's estranged brother, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Seeing them there filled Daniel with a surge of pride and a flicker of nervousness. What if Emma didn't react the way he hoped? What if this grand gesture backfired? The music began to play, pulling everyone to their feet. Emma appeared at the end of the aisle, her veil billowing slightly in the breeze. As she approached, Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. She looked breathtaking, more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, feeling the warmth of her touch ground him. For a brief moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, standing together beneath the open sky. But then Daniel leaned in close, his voice low and steady. "Emma," he whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. "I need you to turn around." As the final bursts of fireworks faded into the night sky, leaving behind a faint glow that mirrored the warmth in Emma's heart, the reception began to wind down. The band played softer melodies now, and the crowd had thinned slightly as some guests drifted toward cozy corners of the beach or gathered near bonfires built earlier in the evening. Couples swayed slowly on the makeshift dance floor, their silhouettes illuminated by the flickering lanterns overhead. Laughter mingled with the sound of waves lapping against the shore, creating an atmosphere so serene it felt almost otherworldly. Emma sat at one of the long wooden tables, her bouquet resting beside her as she sipped a glass of sparkling cider. Her cheeks hurt from smiling so much, but she didn't mind. It was the kind of ache that came with pure joy. Across from her, Mrs. Bennet chatted animatedly with Daniel's mother, their conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. Nearby, Liam stood talking to Jake, Daniel's best man, looking more relaxed than he had all day. Watching him, Emma couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come in just a few hours. It wasn't perfect. There were still years of distance to bridge. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Daniel approached her then, sliding onto the bench beside her and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low and teasing. "Still not regretting marrying me yet?" Emma laughed, leaning into him. "Not even close," she replied, her tone soft but sincere. "In fact, I think I might love you more today than I did yesterday." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the lanterns above. "You've given me so much, not just today, but always. I don't know how I got so lucky." Daniel kissed the top of her head, pulling her closer. "You deserve every bit of it," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "And besides, this isn't just about us anymore. It's about building something bigger, a life where everyone who matters has a place." Emma nodded, glancing around at the people scattered across the beach. Friends danced barefoot in the sand, children chased fireflies near the water's edge, and older relatives shared stories under blankets draped over their laps. Even the stars seemed brighter tonight, twinkling like tiny reminders of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, Emma felt truly whole, as if all the fragmented pieces of her life had finally clicked into place. Later, when the band announced the last song of the night, Daniel took Emma's hand and led her back to the dance floor. As they swayed together beneath the string lights, the world around them melted away until it was just the two of her, moving in rhythm to the music. "Do you remember our first dance?" Daniel whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Of course," Emma replied, smiling softly. "We were terrible at it. You kept stepping on my toes. And you laughed every single time," Daniel added, chuckling at the memory. "I knew right then that I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you laugh like that." Emma rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes as the music swelled around them. She thought about everything they'd been through, the challenges, the sacrifices, the quiet moments that had shaped them into who they were today. And she thought about the future, too, the adventures they'd embark on, the dreams they'd chase, the family they'd continue to nurture and grow. When the song ended, Daniel leaned down to kiss her, his lips brushing hers gently. Around them, guests applauded softly, signaling the official close of the night. But for Emma and Daniel, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A fresh chapter filled with promise, connection, and boundless love. As they walked hand in hand toward the shoreline, the cool ocean breeze brushing against their skin, Emma glanced back one last time at the scene behind them. Firelight danced across faces young and old, laughter echoed in the air, and somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Bennet could be heard humming a familiar tune. It was a moment Emma would carry with her forever, a reminder that love wasn't just about finding someone who completed you. It was about creating a space where everyone you loved could belong. And as the waves kissed the sand beneath their feet, Emma knew without a doubt that she had found exactly that. A partner, a family, and a lifetime of memories waiting to unfold. Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had been so focused on Daniel, on the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, on the warmth of his hands holding hers, that his words caught her completely off guard. "Turn around," she repeated softly, her voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of the ocean breeze and the faint strains of the violin playing their favorite song. Her brow furrowed in confusion, but there was no hesitation in her trust. If Daniel asked her to do something, even something as unexpected as this, she knew it came from a place of love. Slowly, Emma turned on her heel, her white gown swishing softly against the wooden planks of the gazebo floor. At first, all she saw was the crowd of smiling faces, friends and family who had gathered to celebrate this momentous day. But then her gaze shifted further, past the rows of chairs, and landed on two figures standing quietly near the back. Time seemed to stop. The bouquet slipped slightly in her grasp as her hands went limp with shock. Tears welled up in her eyes almost instantly, blurring her vision, but she didn't need clarity to recognize them. She knew exactly who they were. There, standing side by side, were Mrs. Bennet and Liam. Mrs. Bennet, her late grandmother's dearest friend, looked frail but radiant in a soft lilac dress. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her hands clutched a delicate handkerchief embroidered with tiny flowers. Beside her stood Liam, Emma's older brother, whom she hadn't seen or spoken to in nearly a decade. His presence hit her like a tidal wave. He looked older, his once boyish features now sharper, but his nervous smile was unmistakably familiar. Emma's breath hitched in her throat. Memories flooded back. Childhood summers spent building sandcastles with Liam, lazy afternoons listening to Grandma Rose and Mrs. Bennet share stories over tea, and later, the painful silence that followed years of unresolved tension within her family. Seeing them here, together, felt surreal. How was this possible? Why were they here? 1,000 questions raced through her mind, but none of them mattered in that moment. All she could feel was an overwhelming rush of emotion. Joy, disbelief, gratitude, all colliding into one. The guests around her began to notice her reaction. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people craned their necks to see what had brought tears to the bride's eyes. Some smiled knowingly, while others exchanged puzzled glances, but Emma barely registered any of it. Her world had narrowed down to those two figures standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. They weren't just faces in the crowd. They represented pieces of her past, fragments of her heart that she thought she'd lost forever. Mrs. Bennet stepped forward hesitantly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She raised a trembling hand to wave, mouthing the words, "Hello, my dear." Emma's knees felt weak, and for a second she worried she might collapse under the weight of her emotions. Then Liam moved closer, his expression a mixture of guilt and hope. He cleared his throat awkwardly, as if unsure what to say or do. But the look in his eyes said everything. He was here because he wanted to be, because he cared. Daniel watched silently as Emma processed the moment, his own heart swelling with pride and relief. He had poured his soul into making this happen, reaching out to Mrs. Bennet and Liam months ago, convincing them both to come. It hadn't been easy. There had been hesitant phone calls, heartfelt conversations, and logistical hurdles to overcome. But seeing Emma's face now, the raw, unfiltered joy written across it, made every effort worth it. This wasn't just about surprising her. It was about giving her something she didn't even know she needed until this very moment. Finally, Emma found her voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "How?" she began, shaking her head in disbelief. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then she turned back to Mrs. Bennet and Liam, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the waves lapping against the shore and the distant melody of the violin still playing its sweet tune. Yet, in that silence, there was a profound sense of connection, a mending of broken bonds, a rekindling of forgotten ties. And as Emma took a tentative step forward, tears streaming down her cheeks, it became clear that this wedding day would be remembered not just for the vows exchanged, but for the bridges built and the hearts healed. As Emma stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, the moment seemed to stretch endlessly. The world around her faded into a blur. The guests, the music, even Daniel, all of it dissolved into the background as she focused on the two figures standing quietly near the back. Mrs. Bennet and Liam. They were real. They were here, and somehow, impossibly, they had crossed years of distance and silence to be part of this day. Mrs. Bennet took a tentative step forward first, her movements slow but deliberate. Her frail hands trembled as she clutched the embroidered handkerchief that had once belonged to Emma's grandmother. "Oh, my dear," she murmured, her voice quivering with emotion. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world." She paused, pressing the handkerchief to her eyes before continuing. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you today. So very proud." Emma's heart clenched at the mention of her grandmother. Memories came flooding back, afternoons spent in the kitchen baking cookies, stories told by candlelight, and the sound of Grandma Rose's laughter echoing through their home. Losing her had left an ache in Emma's heart that never fully healed, but seeing Mrs. Bennet now, holding on to something so deeply connected to those cherished memories, felt like a balm to that old wound. It was as if a piece of her grandmother's spirit had returned to her, carried in the loving presence of her dearest friend. Then Liam stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over the sand beneath him. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, but his expression was earnest. "Emma," he began, his voice rough with nerves. I'm sorry. For everything." His word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Years of misunderstandings, arguments, and stubborn pride had driven them apart, leaving behind only silence and regret. But now, standing here on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life, Liam's apology broke through the walls they'd built between them. He glanced down at his shoes for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "Daniel reached out to me months ago," he admitted, his voice softer now. "He told me how much today means to you, how important family is to you. And he made me realize I've been selfish. You're my sister, Em. No matter what happened between us, you'll always be my little sister." His voice cracked on the last word, and he quickly cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. Emma felt like her chest might burst from the whirlwind of emotions whirling inside her. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to tell him how much his presence meant, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. The crowd watched silently, many of them wiping away their own tears as the raw emotion of the moment unfolded. Mrs. Bennet stepped closer then, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the ocean behind her. She held out the handkerchief toward Emma, her hands shaking slightly. "This was your grandmother's," she said softly. "She gave it to me when you were born, said it was for safekeeping until you needed it most." Emma reached out hesitantly, taking the delicate fabric in her hands. It smelled faintly of lavender, just like Grandma Rose's house used to. The familiarity of it brought another wave of tears, but these were different, softer, warmer, filled with gratitude and love. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant hum of seagulls overhead. Emma looked between Mrs. Bennet and Liam, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and disbelief. These were people she loved deeply, people she thought she'd lost forever. Yet here they were, standing before her, brought together by Daniel's quiet determination and unwavering belief in the power of connection. Finally, Emma managed to find her voice. "Thank you," she whispered, her words trembling but sincere. "Both of you, thank you." She didn't need to explain further. The depth of her gratitude was written plainly across her tear-streaked face. Mrs. Bennet smiled gently, reaching out to pat Emma's hand. Liam gave a small, awkward nod, but the look in his eyes said more than any words ever could. In that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Emma felt a profound sense of healing. This wasn't just about reuniting with loved ones. It was about forgiveness, understanding, and the enduring bonds that tie families together. As she turned back toward Daniel, still clutching the handkerchief in one hand and her bouquet in the other, she knew this wedding day would be etched in her memory, not just as the beginning of her life with Daniel, but as the day her fractured world began to mend. As Emma turned back toward Daniel, her heart felt fuller than it had in years. The weight of the moment, the reunion with Mrs. Bennet and Liam, was almost too much to process, but there was something grounding about Daniel's steady presence. He stood there, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, watching her with a look of quiet triumph mixed with nervous anticipation. Had he pulled off the impossible? Would she understand why he'd gone to such lengths? "Daniel," Emma began, her voice shaky but filled with emotion. How did you even?" She trailed off, unable to finish the question as tears continued to stream down her face. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her grasp, and she wiped at her cheeks with the handkerchief Mrs. Bennet had given her. It smelled faintly of lavender, just like Grandma Rose's house, and the scent seemed to anchor her, keeping her from being swept away by the flood of emotions. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes softening as he took in her reaction. I wanted today to be perfect for you, he said simply, his voice low but steady. Not just because it's our wedding day, but because I know how much family means to you. You've always talked about how important they are. The people who shaped you, who loved you when things were hard. He paused, glancing briefly at Mrs. Bennet and Liam before returning his gaze to Emma. So I thought, maybe I could help bring them here. Emma shook her head slowly, still trying to wrap her mind around everything. But Liam, we hadn't spoken in years, and Mrs. Bennet, I haven't seen her since Grandma passed. How did you even find them? Daniel gave a small, sheepish smile. It wasn't easy, he admitted. I started with Mrs. Bennet first. I remembered you mentioning her once or twice, so I tracked her down through some old contacts. When I called her, she was hesitant at first. She didn't want to intrude. But once I explained what this day means to you, she agreed. She even helped me reach out to Liam. At the mention of his name, Emma glanced over her shoulder at her brother. He stood awkwardly near the edge of the gathering, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His expression was a mix of guilt and hope, and for the first time in years, Emma saw glimpses of the boy she used to play with on summer afternoons. Daniel followed her gaze and nodded. Liam was harder to convince, he continued. We had a few long conversations over the phone, and I could tell he cared about you. He just didn't know how to fix things. So I told him that today wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was just about showing up, about being here for you. Emma turned back to Daniel, her chest tightening with gratitude. She couldn't believe the effort he put into making this happen. Months of planning, countless calls, and probably more than a few awkward explanations. Yet none of it felt forced or showy. It was pure Daniel, thoughtful and genuine to his core. You did all this for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his smile widening slightly. Of course. You deserve to have everyone who matters most to you here on your special day. And honestly, Em, seeing your face right now, it makes every second worth it. The crowd around them began to stir, murmuring softly as they watched the emotional exchange unfold. Some guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues, while others exchanged knowing smiles. Even the officiant, who had been patiently waiting nearby, looked visibly moved. The atmosphere was charged with warmth and love, a testament to the power of forgiveness and connection. Finally, Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. She reached out and took Daniel's hands in hers, squeezing them tightly. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling but sincere. For everything. For bringing them here, for reminding me what really matters, for being you. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of shared experiences, of late-night talks and quiet gestures, of a love that had grown stronger with each passing day. Daniel squeezed her hands back, his smile softening. Always, he replied. Then, leaning in closer, he added, Now, let's finish what we came here to do. Okay, let's get married. Emma laughed through her tears, nodding eagerly. As they turned back toward the gazebo, she caught sight of Mrs. Bennet and Liam again. They both smiled encouragingly, their presence a reminder of the bridges Daniel had helped rebuild. In that moment, surrounded by the people she loved most, Emma felt a profound sense of peace, a reassurance that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. This wasn't just the start of her life with Daniel. It was the beginning of a new chapter for her entire family. The ceremony resumed, but the air felt different now. Lighter, warmer, as if the weight of unresolved tensions had lifted and given way to something new. Emma and Daniel stood beneath the gazebo once more, their hands intertwined tightly, as if afraid to let go. The officiant cleared his throat gently, signaling the next part of the vows. But before he could begin, Emma turned slightly toward Daniel, her eyes searching his face. Daniel, she said softly, her voice still thick with emotion. I don't even know where to start. You've done so much, not just today, but always. She paused, glancing briefly at Mrs. Bennet and Liam, who were seated near the front row. "You didn't just plan a wedding. You brought my family back together. How do you even do that? How do you see what needs to be fixed and then make it happen without anyone noticing until it's perfect?" Daniel chuckled softly, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles in a comforting gesture. "It wasn't about fixing anything," he replied, his tone steady but filled with sincerity. "It was about reminding everyone, including you, how much love is already there. Sometimes, all people need is a chance to reconnect, to remember what matters most. I just gave them the opportunity." Emma shook her head, marveling at how effortlessly he made such monumental things sound. "But it wasn't just an opportunity," she countered, her voice rising slightly with emotion. "It was months of work, calls, arrangements, probably a lot of convincing. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have focused on us, on making today special for us. Instead, you thought about me, about my happiness, down to every last detail." Daniel smiled, his expression softening further. "That's the thing, Em," he said, leaning closer so only she could hear. "Your happiness is my happiness. Seeing you smile, knowing you feel whole, that's what makes today special for me. And honestly, I couldn't imagine standing here without them being part of it. They're a part of you, which means they're a part of us too." Emma blinked back fresh tears, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. It wasn't just what he said. It was the quiet certainty in his voice, the unwavering belief that love extends beyond two people and encompasses everything around them. In that moment, she realized why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. It wasn't just his kindness or his patience. It was the way he saw the world, not as separate pieces, but as interconnected threads woven together into something beautiful. As the officiant began speaking again, guiding them through their vows, Emma found herself listening more intently than ever before. Every word carried new meaning now, resonating deeply because of the journey they'd taken to get here. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her voice trembled at first, but as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she felt grounded. "Daniel," she began, her gaze never wavering from his, "you've always been my rock, my safe place. From the day we met, you've taught me how to see beauty in logic and strength in vulnerability. Today, you showed me something even greater. You reminded me that love isn't just about holding on. It's about building bridges, mending broken ties, and creating space for others to belong. You didn't just give me a wedding. You gave me a reminder of what true partnership looks like." The crowd murmured softly, touched by her heartfelt words. Some guests dabbed at their eyes while others exchanged warm smiles. Even Mrs. Bennet, seated nearby, leaned forward slightly, her hand pressed to her chest, as if trying to hold in the emotions bubbling within her. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice was steady but laced with emotion. "Emma," he started, pausing for a moment to collect himself. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were extraordinary. Not because of your talent or your creativity, though those things are undeniable, but because of your heart, your ability to love fiercely, to forgive openly, to find joy even in the hardest moments. It inspires me every single day. Today, I promise to keep doing whatever it takes to support that heart, to protect it, and to remind you how incredible you are when you forget." By the time they sealed their promises with a kiss, the entire gathering erupted into applause, cheering not just for the couple, but for the unspoken healing that had taken place. As fireworks lit up the evening sky over the ocean, casting colorful reflections across the water, Emma leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. This wasn't just the beginning of their marriage. It was the start of something bigger, a life built on love, forgiveness, and the courage to bring people together. As the newlyweds made their way down the aisle together, hand in hand, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, a mix of joy and relief that seemed to ripple through every guest. Children waved sparklers, their laughter ringing out like music, while older relatives dabbed at their eyes with tissues, still moved by the emotional ceremony they had just witnessed. Emma and Daniel paused briefly under the archway of flowers marking the entrance, turning back to wave at the sea of smiling faces. It was a moment frozen in time, a snapshot of pure happiness. The reception area was set up on the beach, with twinkling string lights strung between palm trees and lanterns, casting a soft golden glow over long wooden tables adorned with wildflowers. A live band played upbeat melodies, inviting guests to dance as waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. The air smelled of grilled seafood and fresh citrus, mingling with the salty tang of the ocean breeze. Everything felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Emma wasted no time seeking out Mrs. Bennet and Liam, her steps quick but deliberate as she navigated through clusters of well-wishers. When she reached them, she didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around Mrs. Bennet first, hugging her tightly despite the fragility of her frame. "Thank you for coming," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much it means to me." Mrs. Bennet patted her back gently, tears shining in her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she murmured, "this is where I belong. With you. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become." Her words sent another wave of warmth through Emma, reminding her once again of the unbreakable ties that connected her to the past. Next, Emma turned to Liam, hesitating for only a moment before pulling him into an awkward but heartfelt hug. He stiffened slightly at first, clearly unsure how to respond, but then his arms wrapped around her, tentative yet sincere. "I'm sorry, Em," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "For everything. I should have been here sooner." Emma pulled back, shaking her head firmly. "No more apologies," she told him, her tone gentle but resolute. "Let's just start fresh, okay?" She smiled, and though it wavered slightly, it carried the weight of forgiveness. Liam nodded, his own smile widening just enough to show he understood. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from a distance, leaning casually against a table as he sipped a glass of water. Friends and family stopped to congratulate him, patting him on the back and praising his thoughtfulness. "How did you pull all this off without her finding out?" one of his groomsmen asked incredulously. Daniel chuckled, shrugging modestly. "A lot of late-night planning and crossed fingers," he admitted. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about secrecy. It was about trust. Trust that bringing these people together would heal old wounds and create something lasting. As the evening wore on, Emma found herself swept up in conversations she never thought she'd have again. She sat with Mrs. Bennet for nearly an hour, catching up on years' worth of stories and memories. They laughed over shared quirks of Grandma Rose, the way she always insisted on serving tea in mismatched cups, or how she hummed the same tune whenever she baked pies. Each story brought Emma closer to feeling like her grandmother was still there, watching over her. With Liam, things were slower but equally meaningful. They talked tentatively at first, skirting around heavier topics, but eventually, the conversation flowed more naturally. He told her about his life since they'd last spoken, the challenges he'd faced, the lessons he'd learned, and she listened intently, realizing how much they both had grown. By the end of the night, they weren't strangers anymore. They were siblings, rebuilding what had been broken. When it came time for speeches, Daniel stood up, raising his glass to address the crowd. His voice was steady, but filled with emotion as he thanked everyone for being part of their special day. Then he turned to Emma, his gaze softening. "To my wife," he said, his smile widening, "who reminds me every day that love isn't just about two people. It's about creating a world where everyone has a place. Here's to us, and to the family we're building together." By the time the fireworks lit up the sky, painting the horizon with bursts of color, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. Surrounded by laughter, music, and the people who mattered most, she realized this wasn't just a celebration of her marriage to Daniel. It was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. As she leaned into Daniel's embrace, watching the sparks fade into the night, she knew this was only the beginning of their journey, a journey rooted in connection, healing, and endless possibilities.